to record. So, very brief bit of background about what this evening's session is about. Back in 2018, Helen and I did a project called My York Central, which was a public engagement program around York Central, which came out at the end of a lengthy process of dozens and dozens of meetings and 4,000 odd post-its with a vision for York Central and condensed set of big ideas about what people who'd been involved wanted to see happening there. Through that same time, a master plan was being developed by York Central Partnership and their architects, which eventually moved forward to planning application and eventual planning approval, an outline planning approval, which incorporated some of the ideas from the public engagement, but by no means all of them. Though likewise, it didn't appear to necessarily preclude too many of them. After that process had finished, we looked at the vision document and the big ideas and decided we wanted to see whether there was a will to carry that forward. So we did a launch event at York Design Week in 2019. And from that came a group of people from which came York Central Co-owned, or Yoco as it's now known, and the development of ideas which had come out of that original public engagement program. It ran events, it did walks and picnics, it gradually developed and eventually ended up with legal status as a company limited by guarantee, with a plan to build a co-owned mixed-use neighbourhood as part of the York Central development. We met on a regular basis with Ian, who by that stage had been appointed as project director, and who was our main contact with York Central Partnership. During that lengthy process from the original My York Central process through to now, things had changed. City of York Council had declared that it was going to become zero carbon by 2030. It had declared a climate emergency. There had been a proposal to remove private vehicles from the city centre, and Passive House had been adopted as housing standard on the housing delivery programme when the council was building new homes. More recently, we came into contact with Demos, a national think tank who had developed an online tool for public engagement. We decided to try and work together to see if we could combine the approach that we had taken with Yoco and through My York Central with the online approach that Demos were trying to pilot through their online tool, which is called Combined Choice. And so from that has come a 2-month program really through October and November this year, where we are, as we put it, crowdsourcing a community plan for York Central, working with a mixture of live events and online stuff, but also with the Demos Combined Choice tool online as a way for people to share ideas and express preferences. I'd like to now introduce Ian Gray. So Ian has been, as I said, our point of contact through the last year or two, where we've been developing ideas for Yoco and starting to look at what it can achieve on York Central. He's been very much the public face of York Central Partnership and a key person in that public engagement process. His job is, well, only he knows truly what his job is, but from our side of things, I guess his job looks very much like turning the plans into reality. It's shifting from the stuff that there is on paper at the moment through to what York Central turns into when it's finally built. And as such, he's got a view of what the opportunities are within the outline consent. So this event was set up as a chance really for Ian to tell us what his thoughts are on what might be possible on York Central, given the outline consent that we have, and also to then ask questions about how we can work with him to try and make York Central as good as it can possibly be. So without further ado, can I ask anybody who isn't yet muted, apart from Ian, obviously, to mute themselves. Ian, you're on.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks for the opportunity. Can you hear me all right? Everybody's okay? Yep, double thumbs up. So I'm going to do the ubiquitous sharing of screen, which may work, may not. So hopefully, let me see if this, can you see that? I've got a thumbs up, brilliant. Okay, so what I just wanted to sort of do is a bit of an introduction really. And as Phil has said, so my role, I'm project director on behalf of Homes England and Network Rail. So they're my two employers, if you like. Just to clarify, I don't work for the council. I don't work for the National Railway Museum, but clearly in the wider perspective of the partnership, I have a role. So I sit at the strategic board as a probably a minute taker, but I do get involved in the wider partnerships discussions, but it's always quite, well, for me, it's quite important to share that is where I start from, really. So I just wanted to share, and a lot of you will know a lot of this, but clearly talking to a group of people, you're never quite sure who knows what, etc. So I just thought I'd run through some of these and talk a bit more about what Phil has said. So York Central, you will know, I mean, it's just an incredible opportunity, massive, significant urban expansion. One of the largest brownfield redevelopment projects in the UK. Personally think it is the biggest, but it's a bit like, you sort of say that, isn't it? And everybody goes, oh, have you done this? Have you done that? What about that one? And so we just say it. It's one of, and it's a lot easier. So in terms of its scale, it's 45 hectares, 110 acres, derelict industrial, redundant land, or former railway land, or current operational land. So I think the only occupants of it before that were the Romans. So it's been that type of land, either burial grounds or other things for the Romans, and then has become a rail centre, really. So as Phil has said, we, before I joined, outlined planning consent for up to 2,500 homes, including 20% affordable as a minimum. Then you'll see 950,000 square feet of grade A office, the only grade A real significance office location in York, and we can talk a bit about that. And then further commercial space, so what we'd sort of call ancillary retail, private rented accommodation, leisure potentials, and as you can imagine, in the planning consent, opportunities for a hotel or a part hotel being in the city centre of York. Wish I hadn't eaten that Welsh cake because it's now repeating on me, so serves me right, guzzling down something. Anyway, award-winning master plan. So Allies and Morrison's put in for an award for their master plan, and amazingly enough, Architectural Journal gave them that award-winning master plan. I think one of the things I would say is a lot of people look at the master plan and go, that's what it's going to look like, but actually in terms of the planning, it's illustrative. There are some parameters within that master plan around the new road, and I'll show you that, and the park and the other things that we've got to put in. But in terms of how we develop that, and I'm sure that's one of the conversations we are going to have, clearly adjacent to the York Main Line railway station. One of the amazing things for us is, and who knows where this goes, but we're waiting on the IRP, on the rail plan from government. But if HS2 comes along and Northern Powerhouse Rail, there will be a new platform adjoining the scheme, and a new, we have also got to include a new upgraded Western Station entrance as part of that. So we'll have two new platforms next to the scheme, which for our scheme and the commercial development especially is critical. Always like to put the trains, show those sort of 2 hours 25 to Edinburgh, 1 hour 50 direct to London. And clearly the other part of the wider master plan that is not something I'm delivering, but I have to be cognizant of, is the new Central Hall project. And I'm sure there will be people wanting to talk about that, on the Railway Museum. But a big part of all of this, as we've said, is the community uses, the open space, the major urban park, and the significant areas of public realm, which, you know, I think one of the things, if you look at it now going forward, we have, with COVID, if we haven't learned anything, that, you know, actually the open space, the places between the buildings that some of us have always talked about as being the most important, are actually now being more important, because people are actually believing that and understanding it, because a lot of people that have been in limited accommodation in high-rise flats or whatever, not having access to open air or great places to be, absolutely critical for us going forward. So for those of you that don't know the site, I'm sure there aren't any of you, this is the existing site. So a long time ago, I inherited the site when I worked at Yorkshire Forward, probably 17 years ago, as a project. Then if you can see that is obviously here's the railway station. It was called the Teardrop site. And I think really hashtag teardrop is probably not something people would want to use anymore. So I had the joy of sitting in the Cabinet Office when we were talking about the House of Lords, and we'll talk about it, but somebody said, isn't it a whale? Doesn't it look more like a whale? And then, you know, but clearly East Coast Main Line, railway station, freight avoiding line. And this is St. Peter's Quarter, the existing housing, National Railway Museum in here, the Lehman Road Tunnel that comes through there and up to Kingsland Terrace. And this is called York Yard South in our world of sort of where Freightliner have got their trucks and depots, and then the wagon repair depot. And so Unipart Rail, which was in here, the long stay car park. So that gives you an idea of what the existing site was, and beyond the site boundaries, obviously Holgate Works is a big one. So what I was going to do is just show you then the master plan, which then formed part of the illustration for the outline. So we obviously the Millennium Green up here, a new road coming through the site, down through as a new way of accessing that comes under here to Lehman Road Tunnel, a central park with pedestrian and cycleways coming through, and a boulevard that comes along the side. Museum Square here outside the new Museum Central Hall. This is what we refer to, which is the Cold Rocks car park currently as central as Station Square. So this area in here is all the major commercial areas, and therefore, as we've said, serviced off this station is absolutely critical for that development. What I'm just going to do is, as Phil said here, is just some drone footage which we had at the beginning just before we started taking buildings down, that hopefully will work. Sometimes it's quite slow, but here we go. So there's Holgate Works for you that know. This is the freight avoiding line that comes along here. This is what I referred to as York Yard South. So the road, the new road, will come along the edge of there and go down here. This is Lehman's Yard. And you'll start to see the East Coast Main Line here, and then Lehman Road Tunnel in there. So a new road will come, and a spur will come off here to the new road and then come down this way. You can see the existing housing. This is Auto Horn and their car rental business. So here's the East Coast Main Line, and then we'll, hopefully if my laptop speeds up well enough, we can we'll turn back around this way. But it gives you an idea of the scale and looking at the land. So a lot of this old rail sidings now, we've part of the what's called the IP1 contract, sort of preliminary contract, has been to demolish a load of buildings, take up the railway sidings in preparation for the major infrastructure coming in. What I don't think you get and see from the road is it's quite difficult to understand the scale of it all until you actually get on site and walk it. And I know some of you had. So here in going down into Holgate, this is obviously where the light industrial park is here, and Holgate Works, which you can see there's a rail access coming into here and how significant all of that is. And then the road and the park and everything start in here really and come down. So we have the road is following the line here, and this was the old wagon repair depot. So the road goes straight through the middle of that and then turns into Cinder Building, so the edge of Cinder Building where I'm sitting, and this building to the top, which we'll come over. But that part of the original enabling works, we've demolished that building. So that's quite a significant building that's disappeared. Wilton Rise Bridge here that some of you will know, we have a planning obligation to put a new bridge in there because this isn't, you know, it's not very good in terms of access, and especially DDA compliant access. So new road will come in through this way. This is the back of the NRM. So where those of you know, with the sort of little steam line that goes up and down. This is all really in the sort of commercial area as we talked about off the master plan. And then you start seeing the rock, and this area here we were demolished. This was Unipart, that's now gone. So all the commercial would be across this area and linking into the station. You will see Museum Square would be in this sort of chunk in front of NRM Station Hall. And then what we were talking about is the coal drops here and how does all of that work together. Clearly, part of the master plan was for the NRM to their Central Hall project, and stop up the road and to go across the road here. And clearly a divisive issue in some respects for some people. And clearly, how does this all work is absolutely critical to the future of this part of the city. I think one of the things that always strikes me is currently, how do you ensure that the railway station, if you come out this way and come into our development, if you arrive in York, that you don't come out here and feel as you do in, say, Leeds in the Dark Arches or somewhere, and you get lost and you think, where am I? What is this? So some work we did in Sheffield around Sheffield Station about sort of that sense of arrival, I think getting that really clear and getting that sense that you've arrived in York, even if you've come out this way into this form of the development, absolutely critical, because maximizing the opportunity, it's just such an amazing opportunity, but it's also a weight, I think, and some of the conversation had with Phil and Helen and others before is, how do you get it right? How do you make sure you don't just have a solution from other places? I can't stand people, being honest, calling it the King's Cross of the North. It's not the King's Cross of the North, it's York Central, or it's York, and it's how do we make that actually the best place it could possibly be. So Transpennines Express Depot, we also own some land in here, and Network Rail do in there. Clearly this is St Peter's core to the existing housing. I think being honest, I feel that these people, and there'll probably be some of you on the call, are being told what's being done to them. Actually, how do they shape and develop with us the community they're in? So it gives you a scale of all of that, and the road bridge will come over there. So I think it's a very useful thing to look at and to see it, because to try and understand the scale of it, it's almost a bit of the big picture slide, really. So some of which we've talked about, the 2,500 homes, how big it is. We have a pot of public sector investment of 155 million, which, people would say, goodness, that's an awful lot of money. It is, but it is also about, that is incredibly needed to get it over the line, to make it a viable proposition, because what's under the ground, the infrastructure we need to put in, all the public realm we've talked about that needs to go in, the developers or the investors or whoever we do are, with also the Section 106 contribution. So if I say to you, we've roughly got a Section 106 contribution of 17 million that we've got to pay to the council, you can see there's some big numbers in here that have to get taken off the bottom line for commercial viability. But the opportunity, so 1.16 billion to the economy, gross value added, and 6,500 jobs. The potential of it is enormous. Probably somewhere between a 15 and 20-year program. An aerial shot, so you can tell you how long ago. There's the wheel next to the Railway Museum, but I think it's always quite interesting to put the sort of superimpose the master plan, so you can see the road coming through here and down into here, into Lemus Tunnel, the park in this area, the pedestrian cycle routes, Museum Square. What do we do? Station Square, the station. So if I just flick back and then go back again, you can see the scale of it and the opportunity. What I do like about it is it's clearly the master plan does have considerable elements of outside space, but again, design, get that right. What my experience of all these things are, and I noticed my dear friend Pam was on the call, how do you make the best use of those spaces? So get people to love them, get people to help us design them, own them, and want them to be their spaces, not something that's dictated to them by public authorities, is what we are looking at doing as a project team of really getting in, easy for me to say, but engaging with people to help design this, because it's a place for the city and the people of the city. It's for the businesses, the visitors, but mainly the residents, to say, actually, how do you develop this new quarter of your city and make the most of it, of this incredible opportunity, not just bring in something from somewhere else. So current position, around about in that master plan area, 95% of the land is, the developable land is owned by Network Rail and Homes England. They're jointly developing it through a collaboration agreement between the two. So they're both, if you like, government agencies or departments, from government departments. So I have a joint project delivery team, which is me and 2 others. So a lot of people were horrified when I revealed that there were only 3 of us working on this, on what is potentially somewhere between 750 and 800 million pound scheme. But that's currently the way it is. So we talked about the outline planning. We've got reserve matters approved in November 2020 for all the primary infrastructure. So the new access road, bridge over the East Coast Main Line. And we've got to do a lot of work on the utilities and drainage and diversions. And as I said, about 750 million to 800 million pound project. The project obtained a housing investment grant directly from MHCLG, which has come, whatever, sorry, they're not called that any longer, but the Department for Levelling Up, or whatever they're called, I can't quite work that one out at the moment. There was originally a housing infrastructure fund application by the council that unfortunately failed, but at the same time, the Chancellor gave us the money through a different route. So that was incredible to get this, as I've said, phase 1, demolished 3 buildings. We are engaging actively with development partners. That's how we develop this out. And there's some soft market engagement that's gone on. I know some of, so Phil and others may have been involved in some of those conversations. Clearly picking the right partners and the long-term investment partners for me. I'm not interested in development partners that are going to come in for 5 to 7 years, develop their building, try and get away with as much as they can and disappear out. I want long-term investors. So whether that's big funders like pension funds with their development consortiums who will look at a scheme like this, they look over it for 40 years and they want a 4% return. So how do you ensure that they are tied in, because they also care about the park, they'll also care about all the public realm, because being brutally selfish, it affects the value of their long-term investment. So we need to maximize the use of these type of people to demonstrate a long-term sort of sustainability and stewardship model. Feasibility work, I'm going to show you something, but we talked about the House of Lords, and we're now on with, and some of this is out in the press, for a potential government hub for 2,250 civil servants. So just to make you laugh, I walked past Sky News on a Sunday morning, and James Cleverly, who was then the chair of the Conservative Party, as I walked past my TV, he went, and we're thinking we're potentially going to relocate the House of Lords to a derelict land that we own next to the railway station in York. And I sort of walked past and thought, I don't think I heard that. And just carried on. That was just nonsense. I was a bit asleep. And then found ourselves a bit later on sitting outside the Cabinet Office, Deputy Permanent Secretary, discussing the feasibility work. And as you will see on here, we had a load of constitutional lawyers sitting with us who said you can't take the Lords without the Commons. Constitutionally, Black Rod can't get up on a train and knock on the one from York and go down to the House of Commons, get them up. And so, but it did actually happen. And what has happened from it, there's still opportunity, there's still potential conversations going on, but our sort of use of the site and looking at it as partly somewhere for the civil service hub or government activity is really, really useful for us. And obviously we have pink and yellow trains in York. This is an artist's impression looking from Museum Square into what is the sort of commercial area. So Bullnose Building, NRM, as you would expect. The government hub have been looking at this type of area in here to front onto Museum Square, and critical to us again, as I've said, is that whole linkage across into the station to make that feel like it's, you know, an actual wonderful sense of arriving in York. How we get that design correct is critical. So current position, National Railway Museum, I've talked to, stopping up order you'll probably be aware of. Communication review, we've been looking at what has been going on. I think one of the things we haven't been able to do, which hopefully we will be able to do, is we want to come out and tell people what has actually been. So signing up the infrastructure contractor, what is the actual stories that are true, not, you know, the some of the things that come out and people want to celebrate demolition of buildings. Well, rather for me, I'd rather celebrate that we're getting on with it, we're committed, and off we go, and we're engaging with people. So this just gives you a view of that primary infrastructure I talked about. So a new road from Water End opposite sort of the RSPCA in the top here, along the edge of the Millennium Green with new banking, East Coast Mainline Bridge, Lehman Road, spur that comes in from Kingsland Terrace Bridge, if you underpass, if you like, and then down into the boulevards. What are the next steps for us? As I've said, partner procurement underway, really critical to get on with that. We're looking to get the contractor on site in January next year to start the work. One of the big things, and this is where some of this conversation comes in as well, around critically long-term stewardship, as I've said, about how do we look at not just maintaining what we provide up front, but how do you develop it further? How do you make sure the park, the public realm, the community areas are sustainable in many ways, not only environmentally sustainable, but also economically sustainable, that you're enhancing it. One of the problems with big schemes is, and I've known this sort of sitting on both sides of the fence, is in 7-8 years when a load of people have built their buildings and disappeared, and the capital starts to wane, and the buildings are starting to, the areas around the building starting to look a bit tired. Who's maintaining bits and pieces? We've all seen them. We've got to make sure that doesn't happen, and that we've got an amazing opportunity that continues to develop. One of the things I am fully aware of is that, and it comes back to some of the work, I think, fantastic work that you all did, and especially the My York Central stuff. How do we build on that? How do we get the community engaged in activity, designing the park, designing the public realm areas, all the stuff that you're talking about? One of the big things I want to do, we know, we're in York, we're in the next side of the city walls. We're going to have to do archaeological work. So why don't we get the community involved and start digging and helping and doing things and using it as an opportunity? And that's what we're planning. But it's one of those things I want to talk to people and tell people when I've got some dates and things as to roughly when it's going to happen, and just sort all of those, and an action plan of actually telling people what the positives of what's going on. So some of you may have seen this one, always useful, I think. Let's see if I can get this one to work. So this is a fly through that you may have seen on YouTube, which is based on the sort of master plan. So obviously going down Lehman's Road, existing housing to the right, head down here, and then end up going into what was previously the concrete works, so where the Railway Museum currently have their car park. One of the things, and it's something that Phil and I and others have talked about, so is how do we start looking at removing car traffic out of this? I think if you looked now and said, building a road into a city centre, is that the right thing to do? I think building a public transport superhighway, pedestrian cycleways, everything, and doing that is absolutely the right thing to do. But how do you maximise all of that? So back of the NRM and the sort of edge of the park, and we're just sort of coming now into the commercial area. This woman on the left must be on an electric bike, I've worked out, because I can't see her pedal, but she seems to keep up with the camera. And these guys must be being decapitated, but don't worry about that. Apparently they're just models. So there's also potentially here NRM are talking about an exhibition line that would then bring some of their exhibits down into Museum Square, so that, you know, Mallard could be here or whatever, and it just gives you an idea. It's not going to look like this, I don't think, but I think this is what we need to be building upon and saying, okay, that was somebody's ideas, but how do we make this actually incredibly special place? So there's the Lima Road Tunnel, and then just looking back, again, it gives you that sense of what Museum Square could be, the road here and Station Square. And one of the things, and it was something we did reasonably well in Sheffield, is car traffic here should really feel as though it's alien. And it's, you know, it's not part of the, it's sort of driving in there, but shouldn't be, and feeling, what am I meant to be, am I? But the pedestrians and the cyclists should have the priorities. So I think that's probably enough from me, but I wanted to set the scene. So for me, I suppose in concluding it is, I'm absolutely open to all the ideas that you're coming forward. There may not be everything I can agree with and say and do, but I look at it as a fantastic opportunity. I don't see it as something that public sector or developers or anything should dictate to the community. We should be listening to the community, and yes, probably that hasn't happened. And if I say that, a lot of people don't believe me, and they just think it's going to get done to, and I'm a nasty person. But actually, no, I really want to hear what you want to do. How do we get involved? So when Yoco and others have approached me, absolutely, it's exactly what we should be doing. We should be pushing the boundaries of community-led housing, affordable housing. I don't want to create a ghetto for investors or rich people. I want this to actually benefit the people of the city. And how do we do that? And including the environmental sustainability, this development should tread incredibly lightly on the city. So stop me before I start preaching. So hopefully, Phil, that gives you some flavour.
That's excellent. Thank you, Ian. Any immediate questions? I have one. Maybe if the rest of you want to have a quick think, I'll just, hold on, Councillor. I'll do mine first, Claire. We'll come straight on to you after. The one I wanted to ask, which is a fairly fundamental one, is about, you talked about the kind of organisations that you're looking for as development partners, potentially pension funds, big hitters, basically. How do you, within that process, create space for smaller organisations, be they local businesses or local community organisations, to get involved in that process and find their way into it without being simply squeezed out by the scale that's needed?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical on our procurement of our partners, is that it's a bit like, so if we did get the civil service hub, you've almost, if you think of it, a shopping centre, you want an anchor tenant. They guarantee a certain amount of level of rent or whatever going forward. That allows you the opportunity to play more with what actually should be the community, the smaller businesses, all of those things. And if you look at, say you look at retail and people say retail is dead. Well, no, it isn't. Bad retail is dead, in wrong locations is dead. Independent retail in York thriving and struggling, but how do you create that? Well, it's a bit like, making sure you give all those opportunities. So our job as the landowners and going in with these type of partners is to make all of that clear up front as to what it is we want from them. We don't want them just coming in and building big office blocks for major institutions, or equally Airbnb, flats. What we want is people the ability to push those boundaries, but control it and understand the viability, yes, but use the opportunities of the bigger people coming in. That means that we can subsidize, cross-subsidize, and to create starter units or small retail or small light industrial areas in, say, the Foundry Yard or wherever, but actually also offices, etc. So that's the beauty of having two government agencies, is that we should not be, and my job is to make sure we don't do it, is run off with a load of money that we make on this and spend it in the southeast on greenfield development. No, it's got to be reinvested in the long term of the place. So that's what we're trying to do.
That's great. Thank you. Claire.
Thank you. Hello, Ian. I've got a few questions for you. Now, it's really nice to hear that you're still saying the same things as when you arrived in York a few years ago now, and I haven't seen you for a few years. No surprise there. But I have to say, I always enjoy what you've got to say about this, but I don't get the sense that the same message is coming out from the steering group, and it does concern me. And I just wanted to ask you, you know, Phil mentioned the long-term stewardship model, long-term investment, the traffic should feel alien, we don't want to create a ghetto for investors or rich people in Airbnb. How wedded to that are Network Rail and Homes England as organisations at the highest level that are really going to support those principles and make sure that we do get the kind of site that York wants and needs, rather than something that people from London will think looks great but has no real impact or benefit to York? Thanks.
Yeah, and I you know, I agree with you entirely, and I think if you look now and what people are saying out in, so the new chair of Homes England, the new chief executive especially, are looking at, you know, placemaking again, whatever we want to call it. I think previously in some parts of the organizations, the word regeneration and brownfield redevelopment was sort of being lost because there were people saying we've got to build 300,000 houses and only in growth areas. And so I think what has happened is that the sort of, whether you like it or not, the levelling up agenda has made people relook at exactly these type of sites. And I think we've potentially gone from being quite low down in the priority pile to being right bang smack in the headlights. But also they're saying, and it comes back as well with Network Rail, which is, you know, clearly their main interest is in running the network, the rail network, but to demonstrate that to their masters that actually they're doing something really positive with redundant land finally, and that placemaking. I don't like those words, but you know what I mean. That sort of placemaking is incredibly important and high up on government. And you know, people like me, we have to make sure that that is exactly what we do, and it isn't just, as I say, a pastiche of something else. It is for the place, and therefore that's that I'm getting the reassurance. I wouldn't be doing this. I didn't, you know, I haven't taken a pay cut to come and do this, and to get all the grief that I get and the lack of belief from people that I am trying to do what is the best thing to do, to be sitting here just doing half a job, taking the money and disappearing. I want this to be an absolutely phenomenal opportunity and for us to deliver it jointly. And so that's where I sit. I get the reassurance that this is exactly what people want. I think the part of the governance around sort of strategic board and all these other things is, the issue is that at the moment, you see, I sit working for two of the landowners, and a lot of the information is, you know, confidential and is commercially sensitive at the moment. So there's a lot of people that don't really know because we're not yet sharing it. What I'm trying to do from here on in is really, as soon as we get going, is to be able to say, this is actually what it's definitely going to happen. This is actually going to happen. This is what we're doing. Now get on board. And I can start dispelling the myths, because there's an awful lot of stuff that gets made up, which I don't know where it comes from. And a lot of people are saying steering board are saying this, or other people. I sit on the steering board, as I said, well, I sort of attend the steering board, but I don't hear a lot of the stories that come out of it. What I hear is, yes, there is a concern that, the same as you've said, Claire, that are you really going to follow through with this and actually deliver what we want, not what the easy options? And that is a worry, is a concern for the wider stakeholders. But the assurance comes from senior leadership in both my organisations that absolutely they're committed to do it. So they're not looking to take money out early in it. They're in the long-term investment from it, and that's, I wouldn't be here if it was different to that.
That's great, thank you. Imelda, did you have your hand up before David snuck in?
I can't remember, because I was faffing with it and I wasn't too sure whether it's working or not. So I'd hate to sort of push in front of David.
You're speaking now, but David's next.
Thank you, David.
He's nodding magnanimously. So carry on.
Thank
I was
you.
just going to say, as soon as you're speaking, just go ahead. I'll speak.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Just a quick one, really, Ian. I mean, not so much a question as I'd just like to put down a marker. I think if local people are going to be involved, local communities are going to be involved in this, a really quick and immediate and tangible way of doing that is to involve local, particularly creative people, communities generally, in creating a distinctive name and identity for the site. It's really important. It's come up a lot in a lot of the discussions that Yoco has had, and we've got fantastic talent. So I think I'd like to raise the game from not simply talking about, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but there's a tendency to sort of talk about being a creative city. We are a creative city. We have a distinctive image. So I would just say, let's put a marker down and say, this is a quick way of actually getting some real engagement there. Can we, there doesn't seem to me to be any reason why we can't do that.
No, absolutely. And you'd be glad to know that's part of what's come out in our review of communications and the strategy that we've got going forward, because, with a development of this scale, there will be parts of it that will, if you're not careful, the residential house builders will come in and call it Cowthorpe Green or something. And you're like, well, how does that fit into the overall brand, if you like? I don't want to use that word, but that whole quarter of what we're trying to achieve. So there's something in what do you call it? And we've done quite a bit of research in it as well. For me, I don't like the name York Central. It's not Central York. It's the name of the parliamentary constituency. So if I go and try and put, yorkcentral.gov.uk or whatever it is, I'll get that. And so absolutely, how do we engage in that and say, what does it mean? So how do we create an umbrella of a place that actually we then get other people that are building, or communities or whatever? So absolutely open to that. So for me, design work of public realm and open spaces, community orchards, PAM, incredible edible, all of these things. How do we get that going? How do we start getting the community involved? Archaeology, how do we get the schools growing trees? How do we have a tree nursery? We should already have a load of that stuff, but we haven't, and we need to get on with it. So absolutely agree, critical to get going. The people of York, and especially the people surrounding this or in the middle of this development, feel as though I am an alien, my steering board is alien, they don't understand York, I don't understand York. And actually we've got to change that mentality, and we've got to change that. How are we going to do that? By actually doing meaningful engagement. So you don't allow people to design or put some designs up for a new pedestrian bridge and then ignore them and don't refer back to them as to, thank you for your designs, but we've ignored all of them, and actually somehow we've got to get that, and we've got to change that. And that's what's in our strategy. But clearly I need to go through my processes to make sure I can get out into the community and get that. So I'm looking at sign off of all of that, but I'm totally with you.
Just to bottom that out then. So some of that, at least a fair chunk of that kind of search for talent to do that kind of stuff would happen locally rather than nationally.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we've done some work, and we've had to do some work with, and some of you may have been on the consultation with Network Rail sort of comms consultants, because I had to use them because that was the only way I could fund it, being honest. But we've done some preliminary stuff, and they've got some preliminary ideas, but we want to open that up and start saying, okay, what do you guys think?
Right, so, okay, thank you. David, you've been very patient.
No, that's okay, thank you. So, hi Ian. I just wanted to ask you, because obviously your role, as you said, is turning these plans into reality, and what that obviously means is not just the final vision and what we end up with, but also what we have in the interim time, the journey to get to that point and how it's all phased and what we get in the meanwhile. And that obviously matters quite a lot to people, because this is going to be many, many years in the making. Obviously no one knows exactly how long, but it's obviously going to be, a long time. And so to that effect, with the outcome of the Stopping Up inquiry, I obviously don't want to go into that in any sort of detail, but one of the things that the planning inspector agreed with us about was that the Riverside route itself definitely needs improvements. He agreed with that. And he also agreed that it should be before the stopping up, so that the mitigation of the impacts comes before the impacts. And so obviously that's raised an awful lot of questions with us in terms of phasing of the Section 106 money, the priority of it, so on and so forth. And obviously that Section 106 money is going to be for lots of different purposes. It's going to be phased over time. And it's not really apparent to anybody, how that all fits together. So really my question to you is there anything in the York Central programme plan that gives us any suggestion of timescales of the Riverside route improvements? And is there a dependency in place in that programme plan that is trying to ensure that the mitigations happen first?
Okay, so from our perspective, as the two main landowners, so we've obviously fully aware of you are of the importance of that route, and have been, I think, before my time. I mean, I only joined in May 2019, but there have been long-going conversations about funding from the development through the 106 agreement to do that Riverside path. Now, the blocker I understood was it Helmsley Estates or somebody that own a chunk of, I understand,
Yeah.
but I don't, this is one for the council rather than me, is that there has been a conclusion of the land deal that was needed to be done. Now,
yeah, the council confirmed that.
What we do is, I think we've got about a £7 million contribution towards transport. It might even be 9 million. I can't remember off the top of my head. So really our view is that what happens with us is we give that money over to the council, and the council decides where it's to be spent in transport terms. However, in the agreement, there is a conversation around and an element around how much is to go towards the Riverside path. From our perspective, we understand the issue with it, and it should be, I think that funding could quite rightly go towards that area. Now, that's not in my gift. That's not something that's really for the council to take the contribution and spend it, and where they spend it. But clearly, we are fully aware that absolutely that's an incredible walk through and a route in, and a priority route for most people getting from the Kingsland Terrace area through down into the city. And it's a much better way. So why wouldn't that become floodlit? How does it look in times of flooding? All of these things. So we're really supportive of that. But it's not in our gift, but it's also in our contribution. We're giving it to the council and saying, over to you then. That's what you've requested of us. They've got to use it wisely, and I think they will use it towards that. But I don't have any detail on the programme of when they're going to do it or what, but I know they've solved the problem, so I'm presuming they'll want to get on with it as well.
Okay, so there's nothing in your programme plan there that lines up.
It's not for us. We don't own the land. We can't get into the legal agreement with it because it's not part of our obligations to pursue it, because clearly we couldn't, because we're not a landowner. All we can do as part of the 106 agreement is to give money towards it, and it's therefore the landowner and the council's responsibility and role to get it sorted. How the council want to spend that contribution is down to them, but clearly we would like to see it happen as well.
Okay, is the phasing of the actual Section 106 payments part of that though? Because that presumably is part of the programme, is when those become payable. Yeah,
the 106 is then set against development targets of when we bring forward development. Now, one of the other things we've already, instead of waiting for that target, have front funded a load of money into the 106. So we've paid before we needed to, because clearly we're also of, let's look at it from a joint public sector investment approach. If we have the money and can put that forward, we need to put that into the council to help with this stuff, because, we all know budgets are tight, COVID, trading accounts, all of that. So I'm also looking at, can we front fund funding into that 106 agreement? And there's a conversation going on, but I don't know.
That's great.
Right.
Thank you.
That's
Thanks, David.
good to hear that it's not just on that timing then of that.
No.
Yeah, it can be worked out.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Can I move on to the next question, which was Julia, I think.
Hi. Right. Hi, Ian. I was I was talking with Pam the other day, and I think I mentioned this. So yeah, on just some of the things that you've talked about, it's been really interesting seeing the flyovers. I still am completely baffled about the 2,500, you know, but this is about, I'm a writer and, you know, think about new ways of seeing things. And one of the things that you've mentioned is it was when you were talking about that people see you as an alien, all this sort of thing. And I'm going, oh, well, you know, he's written himself into this book now, and there's the aliens here. And it's all getting a bit like that now in this, you know, and we're all trying to address it with renaming the site. Does it want to be a teardrop? No, it wants to be something else. For me, can we be really practical? This is my question, because it seems like some agendas are converging here. You've already said that you've talked about the archaeology and the real need and want to get people in the community to say, to be part of it. Imelda's mentioned this whole thing about a very creative city, which I think we are. So could we not just set some sort of timeline, like, and to do practically with the weather, so that when we've got spring coming, that, you know, there's going to be building work starting and billboards. This is a fantastic space, in my view, to create the sort of images that people in and around that community want to make on the billboards, if we can persuade people to do it. Also, as a sort of like writer and performance and all these things, we can get the libraries involved as well, is that people can write and that can go on the billboards. What I think would be really fantastic, and I've banged on about this for ages, is a sort of meanwhile hub where people could keep creating images, photographs, words, so they come together on that site, and it becomes of its own accord. All of these things would happen. I think that's the whole thing around access. But then the second part that is really critical and has come to me since we've all been talking this evening, and I've watched all this stuff on the flyovers and the plans and everything else, is that it's a bit like when art galleries, it's my perfect pet hate actually, they put sort of children's work or community work in a little sort of corridor. It's not really art, it's just what the people do. Is when, if say all this work was created, is that it has kudos, it has stuff behind it. That actually usually means budget, but also the psychology that it's as good as, it's different to the drawings and things. So, but we'd need a plan. We'd need to use the next spring and summer, and we've got the creative people, we've got the project managers, we've got loads of youngsters that are fantastic at all of these sort of things, as well as good, you know, creative project managers on side. So my question is that too silly a line of thinking?
Not at all, Julia. I mean, you'll be reassured to know that I'm a former chair of a communities arts organisation. So I was the chair of Mantle Arts in Northwest Leicestershire, and so obsessed in old coalfield communities 20 odd years ago with lantern parades and getting kids involved and national forests and all sorts of stuff. So I'm with you. For me, absolutely, community are creative people. What we're looking to do, and it's a bit like, I don't want to, you know, say too much without being able to deliver, because the scheme has had enough of people saying this is going to happen and never happening. But for us, and this is part of the conversation we've been having around Foundry Yard and where Autohorn's buildings are currently, which is owned by Homes England, they are moving out of there to come to Clifton. What we're looking at doing is creating a presence there for the project, but also for drop-in, for people to come in to help, almost to have a board, you know, they had an old boardroom in there, get a table, get some plans, get designing, get thinking. But absolutely, you're right. Billboards, you know, the board surrounding bits, the work that we'll be doing. So the archaeology, if I can, basically what I have to do in terms of the Unipart rail just out here in the area where, you know, the long stay car parking at the back of the station, here we're going to do the dig. It's just a timing thing. So it's going to be, okay, I want to come out to the community when I know it's going to happen. I don't want to come out and go, Well, we're thinking of doing this. I want to actually start doing things that we can say we're going to do. So as soon as we can, it's a bit like Autohorn. I thought they were going to come out by now. I don't think it's going to be until probably, sorry Phil, around February time next year, because they're delayed in Clifton of their relocation. But actually creating things on site that people can get involved in, come in, drop in, almost if we can find a way of some startup or some, you know, space for community groups. Let's start doing that, even if Yoco needs somewhere or whoever, and use those facilities to do exactly what you're saying, because it's critical. It's absolutely critical. One of the things I've, you know, often found in sort of derelict areas and redundant areas and areas of dereliction I've worked around the country, and people don't like this, but boxing clubs are exactly the same for me. Boxing clubs, people say it's violence, it's horrible, and it's all this, but what I've seen the impact of things like that, where taking kids off the street, giving them some discipline, and actually things change in certain mentalities. Community art, getting people doing creative things. If you've got people that are creative, that just enthuses so many other people to get involved and it's the same with tree planting. So I used to work for the National Forest Company in the East Midlands, and going and planting trees and getting people that are not enthused about all of this, but understanding their community and everything, and getting involved and helping and feeling that they're part of it. Sadly, I used to plant my oak tree at the end of the row, so I knew where it was, until somebody said to me, Ian, we'll come and thin those out probably in about year 5 or whatever. I thought I could go back and see them. And it's like, how do you get that enthusiasm? Well, these are all the things we need to do, and not just go, okay, thanks community. We know better than you do, and we're going to build you some lovely stuff, whether you like it or not, but we're not going to do that.
Can I just interject there just quickly, just to say, is there nothing, a space, if the space is available now, that the Railway Museum could just somewhere, just to get started? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not in charge of the Railway Museum. I'm not involved with them. So yeah, I can ask that question, but it's not something I can. What I'm trying to do is the stuff that I'm in control of, that I can get going, and then I know that it's going to happen, and I know there's a certainty and a longevity to it, and it's not just a bit of tokenism, that it actually is part of the development going forward. So it becomes a, you know, whether we've got a pop-up cafe or something in there that people can come and get involved in creating things, trying to look at the plan for how do we design a park, because what your idea of a park and my idea of a park may be completely 2 different things. I want, you know, a wild space. I want the community orchards. I want trees. I'm a sado because I want fast running white water, but will I ever get that? No, probably not. But you know, all of this time, I want to explore all of those ideas and really get creative and start thinking, okay, how do we do this? Because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Let's push all the boundaries. For me, there's often 300 crazy ideas that come out of some of this stuff, and 20 of them may be absolutely phenomenally wonderful, and we've got to grab hold of those.
Ian, thank you. We've got, I'm aware we're at 8 o'clock, but we've got 3 hands up. Are you okay to go through those three questions? And be,
yeah, look, I'm sitting in the cinder bin. I'm just worried, yeah, if my car, like I said, if my car gets locked in, we could be here for ages.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, if you're here for the rest of the night, we'll make use of the time. So, Stephen, you need to unmute yourself. No, we've got no sound. It's not looking good. We have a sound problem with Stephen. Can we shift on to Chris while Stephen sorts his
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, got you.
Okay, right. Ian, I'd just like to, when you were going through the flyover view of the plan, seeing it in 3D like that really drew my attention to one particular area, which has been called the Grand Plaza, which is going to link for the new entrance from the Railway Museum to the new entrance to the station. Now, in that flyover, it looked far less grand than I'd imagined it. It looked quite meagre, actually, and I was a bit disappointed because I've sort of imagined myself in that space quite a lot. I walk through it practically every day. I spend a lot of time thinking about what it's going to be like. But it's going to have to do so many things. It's going to be the new entrance area for the museum. It's going to be the new entrance at the back of the station. it's going to have to serve the route for all the cyclists and pedestrians that are diverted around the National Railways are very unlikely to be able to get through it at times of their choosing. And it's going to have the main road through the site going through it as it goes into the Marble Arch Tunnel. Do you not worry immensely about how all of these things are going to be served by that space?
I think that, I mean, for me, it's the problem with putting illustrative designs. So I could, you know, those designs and those things, and they look bland. Actually, how do we get that correct? It's the same thing. We've got to get people to help us design it. We've got to get the community involved in it. It has to be really, really good. So a project I did in Sheffield, outside Sheffield Station, if you ever go down there and look, I had a horrendous conversation with members of Treasury. We owned, an English Partnerships and Yorkshire Forward owned 2 office blocks that were worth about £16 million. We then did a scheme that, however, multi-millions, to create a new entrance, fountains, new way of getting into the city, massive public realm. Treasury then said to me, so how much are our buildings worth? And I said, probably about £1 now. And in fact, they're probably more like a liability. But what it did, if you ever get the opportunity, you used to walk out of the station and you felt as though you were in the flipping middle of the motorway. And then there was the Nelson Mandela building over, and you had this sort of pelican crossing that everybody shoved through. Now you've got a situation, whether you like the public realm or not, and people will tell me they don't like it, which is great, because you want public realm to be of great quality, but you also want it to be thought-provoking for me. So art, everything, thinking about it. That's what we need to do. So there's no plans for it, but we know we've got to spend a ridiculous amount of money on it, because you've even just called it the back of the station. I don't want it to be the back of the station. I want it to be part of arriving in York. And it's actually the station. You've arrived in York, that sense of arrival, because we're exactly right. I don't want it to be a rat run. I don't want it to feel as though it's a place for cars. I want it to be a place of pedestrian cycling preference and a sense of arrival. So the commercial area, when you come into a station, what I think is really great finally is stations are now, you know, if you look at King's Cross, what they've done, but Grand Central, I can't call it Grand Central, it's New Street in Birmingham for me, as a guy who grew up there. You know, stations just happen to be within buildings now, rather than stations being, you know, the be all and end all. So we have to put up with WH Smith's, Burger King, the same bit of Traveller's Rest across the whole. No, let's create something that feels as though it is part of the development and part of that sense of arrival. So it's not going to look like that. But as soon as I put anything on a plan, everybody goes, I don't like your plant as much. That's the wrong colour. Look at the paving slabs, aren't they? But the other good thing in the outline is obviously the design guide. So there's a big prescriptive design guide that a load of developers will go, oh, this is horrible. Well, I don't want to work with you. What I want to do is people that come along and go, okay, let's take that level of design that's been done and embellish it and go, actually, that's not good enough. We want to get better. So we want to get better in environmental sustainability. We want to get better in actually exactly what you're saying. What is good design in those public arenas? Critically, let's get it feel as though it is a pedestrian space, it is a cycling space, it's not a car space. Start with that as the basis and then embellish it from there and go, okay, how do you make that square and that whole area feel like it's owned by the York people and it's theirs? Well, what interaction do you have? How does it all work? There's loads of stuff that we can all do together simply around great bits of design, bits of fun, bits of interaction, but get that sense of Yorkness is a word I use, but it's a terrible word. But how do you make it feel like it's part of the community, not just here's King's Cross of the North, here's Grand Central, here's Brindley Place in Birmingham, here's half of Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield that all look exactly the same. No, don't do that. So yeah, I think, and we have millions of pounds in theory to put into that. But again, doesn't matter how much money you got if you spend it badly. So it is part of that design, definitely. Doing it well.
Can I just say a quick comment on that? Thank you. I appreciate your ambition. You're raising your sights on that. The thing that really worries me, continues to worry me, is however nice it gets to be in terms of that vision, you're still going to have all of the traffic from the site running right through it. That's the real concern.
Yeah, I think, but the issue for me is if you've got a council that's made a decision, and they have done, to take car traffic out of the city walls, You've also then got to understand what does that do for running a station. You've also then got to understand what does that do for Lehman Road Tunnel. For me, I would like that to be a public transport preference. So whether that's bus gated or whatever it is, that is not a rat run through into the city centre. But so if it is a rat run, where's the traffic going to go? Because it can't get into beyond the city walls. But again, how do you become a place for the station to function? It never ceases to amaze me how people will drive to a station, a mainline station, park for £25 a day and go off to London, Edinburgh, wherever. No, we need people on an integrated transport system that they feel safe and happy on a park and ride that is 24/7 operation, or they get into park and rail and they park at Cattle or wherever it is and they come in and you're part of that. You don't need to be in that car. You don't need to be coming. And if we're doing servicing of the commercial areas or the resi or whatever it is, you do that between 6 and 8 in the morning, and you're not allowed to do it another time. So it's again, how do you make that opportunity happen? But clearly there's other aspects. I can't solve the transport plan of the city, but what I can do is start saying, okay, how do we make sure that you're right, that isn't clogging up our development or your development and creating an area that just feels completely wrong for pedestrians and cyclists that we're encouraging to get there. So absolutely with you.
Good, thank you, Ian. Stephen, have you now got sound?
Well, again, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you. Got IT problems. Just try and be fairly straightforward with this. This looks a fabulous opportunity. It looks a great opportunity. And I suppose the question or the thinking I've got is, what research has been done into similar opportunities that have existed, or maybe this is quite unique? What lessons have been learned or could be learned from things that have been done really well, or things that have not been done well in other cities, other areas across Europe, worldwide, to actually say, how have we actually got the leverage? How have we engaged with the right stakeholders and got support to get what people really want? I don't know if I'll not elaborate anymore. I don't know, Ian, if you've got any.
Yeah, so I think, thanks, Stephen. I think some of this obviously predates my intervention, but I think, how do you learn those lessons? Well, clearly, as I've said, you can, it's funny, I once went on a trip. I had to go on a work trip to Barcelona. It's tough, isn't it? But basically because there wasn't enough people going on a sort of study trip, and I had to go. And I walked around Barcelona, and you start walking around and you see all the same designs that are now in this country. And you go, somebody came on a study trip and copied that and copied that. And I actually saw my old office block my first job when I worked for AMEC. And I thought, flip that is. And there was a guy there that I worked with in AMEC. And I said, that's our old building. And you go, okay, so you can go into Manchester, Sheffield and Leeds and places, and you see exactly the same development. How do we stop that? Well, you stop that by making it actually, it's its own development. And it's for the people of all of that. But again, don't accept it. I'm not going to accept a bog standard design, and the council won't, and we've got to design it. So we've got to do that. Now, clearly other things, around traffic, how do you get that whole conversation we just had? How do you remove traffic out of the development as best you can? Now, clearly people will want to have their own cars. But how do you encourage car share? How do you encourage a car club? How do you encourage cycle hubs? How do you stop people from going to wanting to drive to the station? Well, that all fits together. But so for me, the last project I worked on, I was working in Oxford. So the difference was I had probably a £500 million scheme, exactly the same, historic city, cycle crazy, a lot of history, a lot of problems in terms of design, making sure that design fits. And you don't just, you don't just create a museum. You look and you say, how do you take the history and you build on it as well as reflecting it? And I think my job is to make sure that we don't just settle for something, and you go, well, it's York, isn't it? They'll be happy with that. And you go, no, I'm sorry, it's an incredibly special place. It's a historic city. It's right next to the city, city walls. You've got to do something special, but how do you create something that is new heritage or new and create and look at these? There's so many different things of innovation and different bits of buildings and great bits of design, but also the biggest bit for me, as I've said all the way through, is how do you get people to love it and own it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll give you a great example. So I used to sit on the 3 URC boards in Yorkshire. So I was in Hull, Bradford and Sheffield. That's how I know about the Sheffield one. If you take the Peace Gardens in Sheffield, so if you know the Peace Gardens next to City Hall, massive bit of public realm, big fountains. And I used to have this hilarious argument with Bob Kerslake, who was the chief exec at the time of Sheffield City Council. And Bob then became chief civil servant and others. Great guy. But Bob said to me, the reason why there's no graffiti on all that sandstone and all those fountains is because I've got really good CCTV. I said, Bob, that's rubbish. It's basically because people love it. They own it. They call it the beach. They go and play in it and they feel it's theirs, and dare put any graffiti on it. And that's the difference. And that's what we've got to have here, is how do we get the enthusiasm of all you guys who, goodness me, you haven't even paid the £5 to listen to this dire stuff that I'm putting forward. But, how do you take that enthusiasm for your place and you've had enough of all this, you want it to get right. How do we do that? And how do we corral that? And yes, there'll be stuff that we disagree on, but how do we get that enthusiasm into the whole of the development, not just the nice bits and the big bits, but the whole way that shared space works or communities work with one another in areas. And you don't have this sort of, and especially in heritage places, which was the same in Oxford, you suddenly get new developments and you look at Hudson Quarter, half of it when you walk around the residential stuff has now got the black key boxes. So they're Airbnb or other things. And you go, right, how do we manage that so it doesn't become that? How does it, we've got the government's housing delivery agency, 20% affordable is a minimum. That's what's in the policy. We should be pushing that to say, okay, what's the mixed tenure? What's the shared equity? What's the affordable housing of the future that we now need to be bringing in now and not in 15 years' time? How do we push all of that and learn from that? Well, that's what we've got to do. But I've got to be able to have those conversations with you so I can bring those in as well, to be saying this is what the community wants, not just 12 people or whatever who are the only vociferous minority, but how do we engage other people and say, this is your city, this is what your opportunity, this is 110 acres next to the city walls, come on, how do you get involved in it? And that's what I think, you have to bring all of these things together and use it as a testing bed and say, okay, here's a mad idea. So I'm a mad idea. I want white water. I love white water. I think it takes I think Home Pierpoint and others and the Olympic Park works on about a 3-meter drop. So I then think, okay, I've got water end, I've got that. Okay, how can I create some fast water that could then be a canoeing, whitewater rafting in my park? I create a park that's a lot more interesting. I can use the power of the water to repump it round in the night using solar and the hydroelectric, and those are the crazy things that people go, Ian, you're a lunatic. Why do you even think that? But why not? Why not think bigger and start thinking about all these things that you've always wanted to think of? That's a great idea. We need to do that and push those and say, why not?
Yep,
But
I would agree.
I'm sure we're going to see you there on Sunday at a session about public open space, Ian.
I'll be there.
White water will be there. Excellent. Right, next question then. Lyndon, you've been multitasking, getting your tea cooked in the background, but now you're on. So,
and thanks very much. Thanks very much, Ian. I'm a resident of the area, new to York, and delighted to engage. So it's great to hear your first-hand views from inside the planning process. A couple of quick questions and then some sort of question suggestions. So is it possible to get access to the drone footage that you're using so that we can also use it to think strategically about the site? This is just a simple question. Next question, and you may or may not be able to answer this, so it's an ignorant question from me, so I'm just going to ask it anyway and see what you say, which is, do you know what the consenting or kind of negotiation process will be for installation of cellular services in the area? because there are community-owned options that could take up that role and therefore provide profits back to the community rather than just bringing in corporate providers. So that's the second question, like what's the process for buying the radio spectrum or doing whatever you need to do physically in the area to get those that core infrastructure set up? So that's the second question. Third one, you mentioned archaeology. Has there been any consideration of a proactive approach to not just doing the archaeology we need to do when we're building the site, but instead, can we replicate something like Jorvik, where from the outset, we have a plan to do the archaeology we have to do to preserve the history, and on the back end of it, have an economic business plan that's going to enable us to employ local people to display the archaeology and generate jobs and tourist income, et cetera, and bring more pedestrian traffic to the area to view said archaeological finds. So that's question number 3. And then question number 4, you talked about how are we going to get people to maintain the green spaces that, developers come in and then after 10 years or so, they, it's just a burden on them to keep maintaining the green spaces that they're not reaping any profits on. Has there been any discussion of, or is there any scope for actually vesting ownership of that green space in the middle of the, whatever we're calling it, such that the people that live and work and play there literally, legally own it, and therefore very much have a vested stake in maintaining its appearance, creating community space, creating space that everyone loves to come to because it literally is their space. So yeah, a lot of questions there, sorry, but I've tried to be brief.
Right, I'll open the exam paper and go through all of these questions one by one. So drone footage, we own it. So I'll look at whether I can share it. Don't see why not. So second question was
wireless.
Right. So I was formerly the chair of Superfast West Yorkshire. I appeared at the DCMS select committee around BT and the whole of their monopoly. So for me, absolutely. So it's 2 things for me. One thing, if I can create, which they will hate, a series of ducts that they have to rent off me, that I then use that space for them or whoever the main utility providers or whatever, I then use that to put into a community land trust or whatever for the long-term maintenance. Absolutely want to explore all of those issues. At the moment, all I know is where I've got to divert services. But how do we do that? BT Openreach, as you can imagine, they're promising the earth to me at the moment. They want to do all this lovely community stuff. Do I believe them? I'll leave that one for you, but absolutely got to look at all of that, because it is a model of not just giving away your asset, but actually how do you use that for the long-term sustainability of the place and get some revenue streams that come back into what is the long-term stewardship model. Now we're doing a piece of work around that. So, I've said, people know this of me, I'm a model village obsessive. I love model villages. I love Port Sunlight, one of my favorites. Lady Lever Art Gallery, one of my favorite buildings in Port Sunlight. So the Quakers and what they did, you got New Earswick here. I grew up in Birmingham, so Bourneville. All of these places are still, Saltaire, still cherished as wonderful places because they set them up well. They set up the long-term investment potential. So how do we do that on here? And it becomes a community trust or whatever, not, and I've sat the other side, I've been an interim director in councils where big urban extensions, the government have agreed that the developer will set this community land trust up, and in 7 years' time, nobody knows who's on that trust. Half of them are disappeared, and then the council ends up having to pick up the fact that nobody's grass is being cut, the playgrounds are not being maintained, all of this stuff. We have to understand that now quickly, and that's a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment. But absolutely make sure the community, that's part of the ownership, invested in it, they're working on it, they love it, and they can shape it and future develop it. Don't just let it sit at a level. Let's get on with it. So that was 3. What was number 4?
Overall ownership.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a mix of that, like not just metaphorical ownership of the space, but literal legal ownership of the space.
Absolutely. And I think that is all part of the model, because how do you create that? So say I sell a patch to you, Lyndon, and say you look after that. How do I ensure that that happens? Or how do I ensure that you do that? Well, I'd rather invest it into a bit like the model village stuff, into some sort of long-term trust that has those charitable objectives to ensure that it's advanced, ensure that it happens and that people do it. But one of the things, going back actually to Stephen's point before, one of the things early on in my career, we did a development in St. Helens, around about St. Helens, and there was a piece of canal at the back of the development. And we wanted to turn the houses to front the canal. Now, the local planners wouldn't let us because they said it's too risky. But we eventually got 40 out of the 250 units turned. So the front doors fronted onto the canal and the gardens fronted the canal. So instead of there being a 3-meter high palisade fence or blocking and the canal become a dumping ground, it actually, the towpath became part of your ownership almost, and you looked after that. It's a bit like a great friend of mine lives in a place down the road from me, which has always been the Britain in Bloom winner for years and years and years. The fear he has, because he hates gardening, of actually when the judges are going to come with a month to go and all the people looking over at his garden, and he has to go and make sure he cuts the grass. That whole thing of how do we make that sense of feeling of the place? Absolutely. But equally do it well so that it doesn't become a burden on people and it becomes enjoying. And if you go up the road, you know, just at the top of the site, you've got the Millennium Green. Now, Steph, who works with me on the project, she worked for the Countryside Agency and actually gave the funding to the Millennium Green. So it's a grant. Again, you get these initiatives, but how do you ensure that those things continue to develop and people come through and still want to look after it and are involved? It's a bit like running a sports club. You'll have 3 or 4 people that suddenly run everything for 20 years and everybody just assumes that they run it. And then when they disappear because they're knackered and fed up with everybody taking them all for granted, everybody goes, well, why isn't the pitch prepared? Why is it dirty? So how we make sure that that works is absolutely critical, because if you get that wrong, the whole place starts to go down and people don't feel a sense of pride. But if you look at the models where it's worked, the Bournevilles, the New Ears, whatever it is, where there is that long-term sustainability, people love it. And, you know, if you're brutally frank about it, the values go up. So people are more likely to invest in it. But how do you do that for normal people, not just people that can afford to live in certain areas like Bourneville or wherever? So absolutely with you, but we've got to get it right and get the community involved.
Thanks, Enda. Thanks, Ian. Claire, you did a slight sneaky one there and stuck an extra hand up after the cut-off point. But Ian, are you okay to do this last one if it's a quickie?
Well, as she's a politician, I have to. I think it's the law.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
Well, not necessarily.
Extra leverage there.
I'm joking, you, Claire. Don't worry.
Yeah, I was interested around Chris's comments around the plaza and museum square, etc., and that end of the site, and it's multifunction, and then talking about traffic, etc. And I'm just wondering at this point in time, what's Network Rail's view on the multi-storey car park that will, of course, drag cars down that road right into the site? Have you got any update on that?
Well, what I've been saying into Network Rail, and they've been saying, interestingly, is you can't just do this side of the railway station and the other side of the railway station in isolation. I don't want, being honest, I don't want a multi-storey on this side. I wouldn't want it. Now, if you look at it from a viability perspective, they make great amounts of money because, as I said, people will drive to them and spend day rates that are beyond your normal car parking. I don't want that, but I also need to understand how the railway station works, what happens on the other side of the station around, because there were plans for the multi-storey to go over there. What is the strategy, car park strategy? Because also some of this in the old days, and I had this in other places where I've worked, in Northampton was a special one where it's actually part of the franchise. So the TOC, the train operating company, runs the car park. Now, when you talk to them, they're not interested as much in the car park. It's just something they've inherited, a lot of them. But how do you ensure that if we own the franchises now or whatever, how do you ensure that the funding for that, if it's the other side, comes back into York, the scheme, Network Rail? Where does it go? I would much prefer to not have a major car park this side. But a lot of that is dependent also on the stuff we talked about, an integrated transport plan. How does the park and rail, park and ride, how does that all work in terms of servicing the station? Yes, but servicing our development. So we know that we will have to provide car parking with the development plots. But do I want to try and put that in a 7-8 story car park next to the railway station? Well, I don't really want to do that if I don't have to, but I may get forced down that route. At the moment, I'm trying to say we shouldn't be doing that, and I'm getting quite a bit of support. But again, how does that work with LNER? You know, Network Rail is going to push the boundaries, but that's what I think we should be challenging. We should be saying, actually, I don't want to encourage cars through here. I want a modal shift. I want to encourage pedestrians and cyclists get into the station. If they have to get into the station, get that route. Park and ride working well, park and rail. That's where we want to go, and not be saying, oh, well, I've got to, I've obviously got to provide a car park.
So some of the ideas that were coming out of our workshop on Saturday morning about shifting the parking to the very far end of the site, having a shuttle across it to the station, or making better use of park and ride, again, with some kind of rapid transport, would be the kind of things you might want to be looking at. Yeah. Okay, Claire, this is a real quick follow-up.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to come back on that. The Network Rail own both, or will own both of those car parks. The one on the front side of the station that faces the city centre is approved for planning, and all of the planning applications come from the landowners. So it's, it is those landowners that need to make those decisions. It sounds to me a bit like the decision making is kind of being made to sound like it's going to happen elsewhere, and it's not. So I think everybody just needs to be a bit aware of that, and that LNER don't have any control over those car parks. It is not part of the franchise. It's Network Rail.
Well, actually, there is an issue of the car park with the TOC and LNER on the other side, not this side. So this side, the long stay car parks are owned by Network Rail, but are managed by APCOA. There's not a lease arrangement or anything. So that's why we have the ability this side to do what it is we want to do with this. But clearly how the whole station runs, we have to be cognizant of it. But equally, who's funding that car park on the other side from here, on the eastern station entrance? They may have got planning consent for it, but are they going to build it? What are they going to do? How's it all going to work? These things are all up in the air still. I don't know. That's not part of my world. My part of my world is what we do on this side. So, how do we ensure that as I've said, the preference for me is not to have a 7-story car park in the scheme, but I have to be cognizant of operation of the railway, but that's our preference as landowners on this side, Network Rail included, is not to have it. But I'm also going to have the issue of planning around what do the planners insist upon in policy around reserved matters for office blocks and other things. Personally, I think the council should be saying, we don't want to encourage car parking in near offices or with offices. The station should service the office, not have people driving to a city centre location of the standard that we're talking about. But that may be my utopian view. But if we get long-term investment partners, how do we make sure that we maximise the land and not allow them just to build those cash generators and actually use the land wisely? So in the original illustrative master plan, because of the culture of rail, parking, all of that, the prime office location, the first prime spot in the master plan, if you look at it, somebody's built a car park there. Why would you do that? So I come out of York State, I've come out of York Station, I feel I've arrived in York. What's the first thing I see? A 7-story, multi-story car park. No, absolutely wrong. Should never do anything like that. But because some architect's gone, well, it's a rail station, you need car parking, and actually the TOC and the Network Rail will want it next to the station. No, what element of design is that? Now, a cycling hub, a health and well-being hub linked to a health facility next to a railway station, in a station entrance with a 24-hour pharmacy and all of that. Yeah, absolutely. But will we have to provide the car park? I genuinely don't know at the moment, but my job is to try and resist it.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Right, it's past. I think we probably should wind up just in case they take the wheels off your car as well as impounding it in the car park. But thanks for being with us this evening. Can I just do a very quick plug for upcoming events, things to do, although most of you on screen I think have probably already done it. Go to Yoco's website, yoco.uk. Sign up for the Demos Combined Choice tool. Sign up for membership for Yoco. We have events this Saturday, which on both morning and afternoon, which are all the information is on there. We have a design workshop for Yoco members next Monday evening. So please take a look at all that. Thanks once again for all being here. I'm now going to stop recording.